The sound of hooves drumming against the hard, packed earth split the dawn silence as Eleanor Taylor pressed her face against the smudged glass window of her father's ranch house. Through the film of dust, she watched the lone rider approach, his silhouette growing larger against the backdrop of the rising New Mexico sun. Something about his arrival sent a chill through her bones, despite the already sweltering heat of the July morning in 1878. Eleanor. Her father's harsh voice cut through the small house. "Get away from that window and fetch me my good boots." She turned, her long brown hair falling across her shoulders as she moved to obey. At 20 years old, Eleanor knew better than to question Samuel Taylor when that particular tone edged his voice. The drinking had been worse lately, and with it, his temper. The drought had nearly destroyed what little remained of their struggling cattle operation, and the whispers around town suggested that Samuel Taylor was in debt to men who didn't take kindly to being owed. The knock at the door came just as Eleanor placed her father's polished boots beside his chair. Samuel grabbed her wrist as she straightened, his fingers digging painfully into her skin. "Remember your place," he hissed, his breath sour with last night's whiskey. "And not a word about your mother's silver." Eleanor nodded, rubbing her wrist as her father released her and moved to answer the door. She stayed in the shadow of the hallway, listening. "Taylor." The voice was deep, confident. "I believe you know why I'm here." Lynch. Her father's voice had taken on a deferential tone Eleanor had never heard before. "Come in, please." The man who stepped through the doorway seemed to fill the small front room with his presence. Tall and broad-shouldered, his face weathered by sun and wind, Owen Lynch removed his hat to reveal hair the color of burnished copper. He couldn't have been more than 30, but his eyes held the sharp, assessing look of a man who had seen far more than his years should allow. "I've come to collect, Taylor," Lynch said, his gaze sweeping the modest room before landing on Eleanor's partially hidden figure. "As agreed." Of course. Her father gestured to a chair. "Perhaps we could discuss terms." "The drought has been, we discussed terms 6 months ago," Lynch interrupted, remaining standing. "And 3 months before that. I've been more than patient, Taylor." Eleanor felt a twist of dread in her stomach. Her father had been borrowing money steadily for the past year, ever since the cattle started dying off. First from the bank, then from private lenders, and finally she suspected from men whose business dealings weren't entirely legal. She'd known things were bad, but the desperate look on her father's face now told her they were worse than she'd imagined. "Mr. Lynch," Samuel began, his voice taking on a wheedling quality. "I have something that might interest you, something worth far more than what I owe." Lynch's gaze hardened. "I'm not interested in taking your land, Taylor. It's worthless in this drought and you know it." "Not land." Samuel's eyes flickered toward Eleanor and her blood ran cold. "Something else." The realization of what her father was suggesting hit Eleanor like a physical blow. She stepped forward involuntarily, unable to remain hidden. "Father, no," she whispered. Lynch turned toward her fully now, his green eyes narrowing as they assessed her from head to toe. Eleanor felt her cheeks burn under his scrutiny, acutely aware of her simple cotton dress and worn boots. "This is my daughter, Eleanor," Samuel said, a note of pride now entering his voice as though he were presenting a prized mare at auction. "She's educated, can read and write, keeps a fine house, never been sick a day in her life." Eleanor felt sick now, horror washing through her as her father continued to list her attributes like items on a bill of sale. The room seemed to tilt around her, and she gripped the doorframe to steady herself. "She's worth at least twice what I owe you," Samuel concluded. "Take her as payment, and we'll call it square." The silence that followed seemed to stretch into eternity. Eleanor couldn't bring herself to look at Lynch, instead fixing her gaze on the worn floorboards beneath her feet. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and controlled, but with an underlying current of fury that made her look up in surprise. "Her worth could never be counted in coin, Taylor," Lynch said, his jaw tight with barely contained anger. A woman is not cattle to be traded for a debt. Samuel's face flushed dark red. Now see here, Lynch, you come demanding payment when you know damn well I haven't got it. I expected payment in cash or cattle, Lynch cut him off. Not human flesh. What kind of man do you take me for? The kind who breaks men's legs when they can't pay, Samuel shot back. Don't pretend you're some kind of saint, Lynch. Everyone knows what happens to folks who cross you. Eleanor watched the muscle in Lynch's jaw work as he clenched his teeth. I've never laid a hand on a man who didn't deserve it, he said quietly. And I've certainly never traded in women. He turned to Eleanor then, his expression softening slightly. My apologies, Miss Taylor, you shouldn't have to witness this conversation. The unexpected kindness in his voice nearly undid her. Eleanor straightened her shoulders, determined not to show weakness. Mr. Lynch, my father's debts are his own, but I would appreciate knowing exactly how much he owes you. Lynch studied her for a long moment before answering. $400. The sum made Eleanor's heart sink. It might as well have been $4,000 for all their ability to pay it. The ranch had barely produced $100 in profit over the past year. I see, she said, mind racing. And when is this amount due? It was due 3 months ago, Lynch replied. I've been more than patient. Give us 1 more week, Eleanor said impulsively. Please, we can sell some things, maybe. There's nothing left to sell. Her father interrupted, desperation making his voice crack. Everything of value is gone except you, girl. Don't you understand? It's you or we both end up dead in a ditch. Eleanor flinched at his words but kept her gaze on Lynch. 1 week, Mr. Lynch, that's all I ask. Lynch looked between father and daughter, his expression unreadable. Finally, he nodded once. 1 week. Not a day more. He placed his hat back on his head and moved toward the door. And Taylor, he added, pausing at the threshold, if you try to run, I'll find you. And if you ever try to sell your daughter again to me or anyone else, you'll wish I'd killed you instead. With that, he was gone, leaving behind only the lingering scent of leather and horses and the heavy silence between father and daughter. Samuel collapsed into a chair, his face ashen. Fool girl, he muttered. He might have taken you and written off the debt. Now we're both as good as dead. Eleanor turned away from him, disgust and heartbreak warring within her. I'm going to town, she said quietly. What for? Samuel demanded. You think you can magic up $400 in a week? No, Eleanor replied, reaching for her shawl. But I can try to find honest work, which is more than you've done in months. She left before he could reply, stepping into the harsh sunlight with no clear plan but a desperate determination to find a way out of the nightmare her life had become. The small town of Willow Creek lay 5 miles from the Taylor Ranch, and Eleanor walked the distance with her mind churning. By the time the first buildings came into view, she had resolved to speak with Mrs. Henderson, who ran the general store. The widow had always been kind to Eleanor and her mother before illness had taken her 3 years prior. The bell above the door jingled as Eleanor entered the cool interior of Henderson's general store. The familiar smell of coffee, leather, and various dry goods greeted her, along with Mrs. Henderson's friendly smile. Eleanor Taylor, as I live and breathe, the older woman exclaimed. I haven't seen you in nearly a month. How's your father doing? He's well enough, Mrs. Henderson, Eleanor lied smoothly. I was wondering if you might need some help in the store. I'm looking for work. Mrs. Henderson's smile faded slightly. Oh, child, I wish I could help you. Business has been slow with the drought. I can barely keep myself afloat. Eleanor nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. I understand. If you hear of anyone needing help, would you let me know? Of course, dear. Mrs. Henderson hesitated, then lowered her voice. Is everything all right at home? You look troubled. Eleanor forced a smile. Just trying to help with the finances. Times are hard for everyone. Before Mrs. Henderson could press further, the bell above the door jingled again. Eleanor turned to see Owen Lynch step into the store, his tall frame filling the doorway. He paused when he saw her, surprise flashing briefly across his face before his expression returned to its usual impassive state. Miss Taylor, he acknowledged with a slight nod. Mr. Lynch, she returned, suddenly acutely aware of her dusty boots and travel-worn appearance. Mrs. Henderson looked between them with barely concealed curiosity. Mr. Lynch, your order came in yesterday. Let me get it from the back. As the older woman disappeared into the storeroom, an awkward silence fell between Eleanor and Lynch. She was about to excuse herself when he spoke. You're looking for work. It wasn't a question. Eleanor lifted her chin. Yes, my father's debts won't pay themselves. Lynch studied her for a moment. Can you cook? The question caught her off guard. Yes, quite well, my mother taught me. My ranch cook broke his leg last week, Lynch said, his tone matter of fact. He's laid up for at least a month. I've got 6 ranch hands who need feeding, and none of them can make anything more complicated than coffee strong enough to strip paint. Eleanor stared at him, trying to determine if this was some kind of trick. Are you offering me a job, Mr. Lynch? 3 meals a day, 6 days a week. Sundays you'd only need to prepare breakfast and dinner. You'd have your own quarters small but private. $1.50 a day. The sum made Eleanor's eyes widen. That would be $9 a week, enough to make a significant dent in her father's debt if she saved every penny. But the thought of working for the very man her father owed money to, the man her father had tried to sell her to just hours ago. Why would you help me? She asked bluntly. Lynch's expression remained unreadable. I need a cook. You need money. It's business, Miss Taylor, not charity. Mrs. Henderson returned with a large package wrapped in brown paper. Here you are, Mr. Lynch. Will there be anything else? Lynch paid for his goods, then turned back to Eleanor. My ranch is 3 miles north of town. If you decide to take the job, be there by sunrise tomorrow. With that, he tipped his hat and left. Mrs. Henderson turned to Eleanor with wide eyes. Owen Lynch offered you a job at his ranch as a cook, Eleanor clarified, still processing the unexpected offer. Well, Mrs. Henderson said, he pays fair wages by all accounts. Runs one of the few successful operations left in the county. They say he drove his cattle to higher ground before the drought hit, saved most of his herd. She paused, lowering her voice. But he's not a man to cross, Eleanor. There are stories. I know, Eleanor said quietly. But I need the money, Mrs. Henderson. My father, she stopped herself, unwilling to reveal the depth of their troubles. The older woman's eyes softened with understanding. Just be careful, dear. A young woman alone at her ranch full of men. It invites talk, if nothing else. Eleanor nodded, thanking Mrs. Henderson for her concern before stepping back out into the heat of the day. She had more stops to make in town, but her mind was already turning over Lynch's offer. It was a risk, a significant one, but it might be the only chance she had to save herself and her father from ruin. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Eleanor made her way back to the ranch, her efforts in town having yielded nothing but kind refusals and pitying looks. The Lynch offer remained her only option, and she had nearly convinced herself to accept it when she crested the final hill and saw smoke rising from the direction of her home. Her heart leaped into her throat as she broke into a run. By the time she reached the ranch, the small house was engulfed in flames, the heat so intense she could feel it from 50 yards away. There was no sign of her father. Father, she screamed, moving as close to the burning structure as she dared. Father, where are you? A groan from behind the house caught her attention. Eleanor raced around the building to find Samuel Taylor lying in the dirt, his face bloodied and one arm bent at an unnatural angle. Father, she fell to her knees beside him. What happened? Who did this? Samuel's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy with pain. Wasn't Lynch, he mumbled, his voice barely audible over the roar of the fire. Other men came for payment, couldn't give it. He coughed, wincing, told them Lynch was coming for his money. They didn't like that. Eleanor's blood ran cold. Her father owed money to others besides Lynch, men who apparently didn't share Lynch's scruples about violence. We need to get you to a doctor, she said, trying to help him sit up. Samuel shook his head weakly. No time. They said they'd be back. Said they'd take you instead. You need to run, Eleanor, now. I'm not leaving you, she insisted, tears blurring her vision. You have to. Samuel gripped her wrist with surprising strength. I'm sorry, Eleanor, for everything, for trying to. His voice broke. I never deserved you or your mother. Go to Lynch. He may be hard, but he's fair. Tell him what happened. Before Eleanor could respond, the sound of approaching horses reached them. Samuel's eyes widened in fear. Go, he urged. Through the creek bed, they won't see you. Eleanor hesitated only a moment longer before pressing a quick kiss to her father's forehead. I'll send help, she promised, then rose and ran toward the cover of the trees that lined the nearby creek. She had barely made it to the tree line when 3 riders appeared, silhouetted against the burning house. From her hiding place, Eleanor could see them dismount and approach her father. She pressed her hand against her mouth to stifle a cry as one of the men kicked Samuel hard in the ribs. Where's the girl, Taylor? The man demanded, loud enough for Eleanor to hear. You promised payment one way or another. Gone, Samuel gasped. Took everything and left days ago. The man cursed, kicking Samuel again. You're lying, boys, search what's left of the house. She can't have gone far. Eleanor didn't wait to see more. Keeping low, she moved through the trees along the creek bed, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain they would hear it. She had only one destination in mind now, the Lynch ranch. Night had fallen by the time Eleanor reached the northern road. The glow of her burning home was still visible in the distance, a painful reminder of all she had lost. Her father might already be dead, she realized, the thought bringing fresh tears to her eyes. Despite everything, his drinking, his gambling, even his attempt to sell her, he was still her father, and she had loved him. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her dive for cover beside the road. She held her breath as a single rider passed, then gasped as the horse suddenly stopped and backed up. The rider dismounted, and in the moonlight, Eleanor recognized the broad shoulders and distinctive silhouette of Owen Lynch. Miss Taylor, he called softly. Is that you? Trembling with exhaustion and fear, Eleanor stepped out from her hiding place. Mr. Lynch, she managed, her voice cracking. My father, our house Lynch, was at her side in an instant, his hands steadying her as her knees threatened to give way. What happened? He demanded, his voice gentle but urgent through tears. Eleanor explained about the men who had come to collect her father's debt, about the fire and her father's injuries, about his warning to seek out Lynch. Did you recognize any of them? Lynch asked, his expression grim. Eleanor shook her head. It was too dark and I was too far away, but they were looking for me. They said, she broke off, unable to repeat their words. Lynch's jaw tightened. They won't find you, he said firmly. Come, my horse will carry us both back to the ranch. Before Eleanor could respond, Lynch had lifted her onto his horse and swung up behind her. She was too exhausted to protest, instead leaning back against his solid warmth as they set off toward his ranch at a steady trot. What about my father? She asked, fighting to keep her eyes open. I'll send men to look for him once you're safe, Lynch promised. Try to rest, Miss Taylor. You're safe now. Despite her worry and grief, Eleanor found herself drifting into an exhausted slumber, lulled by the steady rhythm of the horse and the strange sense of security she felt in Lynch's arms. When she awoke, they were approaching a large ranch house illuminated by lanterns against the night sky. Unlike her father's modest dwelling, the Lynch ranch spoke of prosperity even in these hard times, a sprawling main house with a wide porch, several outbuildings, and a bunkhouse from which the sounds of men's voices and laughter could be heard. Lynch helped her down from the horse, keeping a steadying hand at her elbow as he led her toward the main house. Mrs. Flores, he called as they entered, we have a guest. A small, round-faced woman with graying hair appeared from what Eleanor presumed was the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. Her eyes widened at the sight of Eleanor's disheveled appearance. Dios mío, what has happened? This is Miss Eleanor Taylor, Lynch explained. There's been trouble at her ranch. She'll be staying with us for a while. Can you prepare a room and perhaps find her something to eat? Mrs. Flores nodded, immediately taking charge. Come, Nina, she said, gently taking Eleanor's arm. You look dead on your feet. A hot bath, clean clothes, and food, that's what you need. Eleanor looked back at Lynch uncertainly. My father, I'll send men now, he assured her. Go with Mrs. Flores. Get some rest. We'll talk in the morning. Too exhausted to argue, Eleanor allowed herself to be led away. The next hour passed in a blur of warm water, clean clothes borrowed from Mrs. Flores's daughter who was away visiting relatives, and a bowl of hearty stew that Eleanor could barely keep her eyes open long enough to finish. When she finally collapsed into the bed in the small but comfortable guest room, sleep claimed her instantly. Her last conscious thought a prayer for her father's safety. Morning came with the crowing of a rooster and the smell of coffee wafting through the house. For a moment, Eleanor was disoriented, the unfamiliar surroundings confusing her sleep-addled mind. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back, and she sat up with a gasp. A knock at the door preceded Mrs. Flores's entrance. The older woman carried a tray with coffee and a plate of eggs and biscuits. Good morning, Miss Taylor, she said, setting the tray on a small table. Mr. Lynch asked me to bring you breakfast. He would like to speak with you when you're ready. Did they find my father? Eleanor asked, accepting the cup of coffee with trembling hands. Mrs. Flores's expression softened with sympathy. I think it's best if Mr. Lynch explains. Take your time, Nina. Eat something first. The food stuck in Eleanor's throat, but she forced herself to eat a few bites, knowing she would need her strength. After washing her face in the basin, Mrs. Flores had provided and doing her best to make herself presentable in yesterday's clothes. She made her way downstairs. She found Lynch in what appeared to be a study, standing by the window with his back to the door. He turned at the sound of her footsteps, and the grave expression on his face told her everything she needed to know. He's dead, isn't he? She asked quietly. Lynch nodded, crossing the room to stand before her. I'm sorry, Miss Taylor. By the time my men reached your ranch, it was too late. They found your father near what was left of the house. Dr. Martin says he died from his injuries, not the fire. Eleanor closed her eyes, a wave of grief washing over her. Despite their troubled relationship, Samuel Taylor had been her only family. The men who did this, she said, opening her eyes to meet Lynch's gaze. Did your men see them? No, Lynch replied, but I have my suspicions. Your father owed money to more than just me, it seems. The Blackwell brothers, Eleanor said, remembering fragments of angry conversations she'd overheard. Father mentioned them once after a night of drinking. He said they were dangerous men. Lynch's expression darkened. They are. And if they're looking for you, you can't go back to what's left of your ranch. I have nowhere else to go, Eleanor admitted, the full weight of her situation crashing down upon her. My offer of employment still stands, Lynch said after a moment. The cook's quarters are private, attached to the main house but with its own entrance. You'd be safe here. Eleanor studied him, trying to understand his motives. Why would you help me, Mr. Lynch? After what my father tried to do, your father's actions are not your responsibility, Lynch interrupted firmly. And contrary to what some might say about me, I'm not in the habit of letting young women fend for themselves against men like the Blackwells. There was something in his eyes, a flash of old pain, quickly concealed, that made Eleanor believe him. Still, caution made her hesitate. The debt, she said. My father still owed you money. Consider it forgiven, Lynch replied. A man can't pay his debts from the grave. Eleanor shook her head firmly. No, I'll work to pay it off, every penny. I won't accept charity, Mr. Lynch. A hint of admiration flickered across his face. As you wish, Miss Taylor, but I'll be deducting your wages from the debt at a fair rate and providing room and board in addition. It was more than fair generous, even, and they both knew it. Eleanor nodded her agreement, relief mixing with her grief. She would have time to mourn her father properly and a safe place to stay while she did so. When would you like me to start? She asked. Today, if you're up to it, Lynch replied. The men are getting desperate for something besides beans and bacon. Despite everything, Eleanor found herself smiling slightly. I'll need to see what supplies you have in the kitchen. Lynch returned her smile, the expression transforming his usually stern features. "Mrs. Flores will show you everything, and Miss Taylor," he paused. "I'm truly sorry about your father." The simple, sincere words of condolence nearly undid her composure. "Thank you, Mr. Lynch," she managed, before following Mrs. Flores to the kitchen to begin her new life. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that gave Eleanor comfort in its predictability. She rose before dawn to prepare breakfast for Lynch and his ranch hands, spent the morning cleaning and preparing lunch, the afternoon baking and preparing dinner, and the evenings to herself in the small but comfortable cook's quarters. Mrs. Flores, who served as housekeeper for the main house, became a friend and mentor, teaching Eleanor the Mexican dishes that the ranch hands particularly enjoyed and offering quiet companionship as Eleanor worked through her grief. Lynch himself was often absent during the day, overseeing the ranch operations, but he took his meals at the main house, always complimenting Eleanor on her cooking with a sincerity that made her cheeks warm. A week into her employment, Eleanor was kneading bread dough when Lynch entered the kitchen, his expression unusually tense. "Miss Taylor," he said, "may I speak with you in private?" Alarmed, Eleanor wiped her hands on her apron and followed him to his study. "Is something wrong, Mr. Lynch?" He closed the door behind them, then turned to face her. "The Blackwell brothers were seen in town yesterday, asking questions about you." Eleanor's stomach dropped. "They're still looking for me." "It appears so," Lynch confirmed grimly. "They're claiming your father owed them a substantial sum and that you agreed to work off the debt." "That's a lie," Eleanor exclaimed. "I never agreed to any such thing." "I know," Lynch assured her, "but they're dangerous men, Miss Taylor. They don't care about the truth." Eleanor sank into a chair, her mind racing. "What can I do? I can't hide here forever." Lynch paced the room, his brow furrowed in thought. "There may be a way to protect you, but you might not like it." "Tell me," Eleanor urged. Lynch stopped pacing, turning to face her directly. "Marriage," he said bluntly. "As my wife, you would be under my legal protection. The Blackwells wouldn't dare touch you." Eleanor stared at him, certain she had misheard. "Marriage, to you? It would be in name only," Lynch added quickly. "An arrangement for your protection. You would continue your duties as cook, have your own room, and once the Blackwells have moved on or been dealt with by the law, we could seek an annulment if you wished." Eleanor's mind whirled with the implications. Marriage to Owen Lynch, even in name only, was the last thing she had expected when she entered his employ. Yet she couldn't deny the logic of his suggestion. As a married woman, she would have legal protections that were unavailable to her as a single woman. "You would do that for me?" she asked, studying his face for any sign of deception. Lynch met her gaze steadily. "I would. I protect what's mine, Miss Taylor, and as an employee of this ranch, that includes you." There was something in his voice, a warmth that belied his practical words, that made Eleanor wonder if protection was his only motivation. Over the past week, she had come to see beyond the hard exterior that Lynch presented to the world, glimpsing a man of integrity and quiet kindness. "I'll need time to think," she said finally. Lynch nodded. "Of course, but not too much time, Miss Taylor. The Blackwells aren't known for their patience." That night, Eleanor lay awake long after the ranch had gone quiet, weighing her options. Marriage to Lynch would offer protection, yes, but it would also bind her to a man she barely knew, a man whose reputation in the county was complex at best. Yet in her short time at the ranch, she had seen nothing to suggest Lynch was anything but honorable, despite the whispers about his methods of debt collection. By morning, she had made her decision. She found Lynch in the stables, checking the leg of a chestnut mare. "Mr. Lynch," she called softly, not wanting to startle the horse. He straightened, wiping his hands on a cloth. "Miss Taylor, you're up early." "I've been thinking about your proposal," she said, stepping closer. "I have conditions." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "I expected no less." "What are they?" "First, I continue working to pay off my father's debt. Second, I maintain my own quarters. Third, if after 6 months the Blackwells are no longer a threat, we discuss dissolution of the marriage." Lynch considered her conditions, then nodded. Agreed. I have one condition of my own, which is, you call me Owen, at least in public. Mr. Lynch is hardly appropriate for a wife to call her husband. The thought sent an unexpected flutter through Eleanor's stomach. Very well, Owen. His name felt strange on her lips, intimate in a way that made her cheeks warm. When? She asked, eager to move past the moment of awkwardness. Today, if possible, Owen replied. The sooner it's official, the better. And so it was that Eleanor Taylor became Eleanor Lynch in a brief ceremony at the county courthouse that afternoon, with Mrs. Flores and the ranch foreman, Jacob Miller, as witnesses. The judge raised an eyebrow at the hasty proceedings but asked no questions, and by sunset, Eleanor was back at the ranch, a simple gold band on her finger and a new name that felt like a disguise. Word of their marriage spread quickly through the small community, and as Owen had predicted, the Blackwell brothers made no further inquiries about Eleanor. Life at the ranch continued much as before, with Eleanor cooking, Owen managing the ranch operations, and an unspoken agreement to maintain a respectful distance between them. Yet as the weeks passed, Eleanor found that distance increasingly difficult to maintain. She noticed things about Owen she hadn't before: the way the corners of his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentle way he handled the horses, the fact that he always thanked her for meals even when he was tired or preoccupied. For his part, Owen began lingering at the table after dinner, engaging Eleanor in conversation about books she had read or places he had traveled. He brought her wildflowers he found on the range and asked her opinion on ranch matters in a way that made it clear he valued her intelligence. 2 months into their arrangement, disaster struck in the form of a prairie fire that threatened the eastern boundary of the ranch. All hands were called to help fight the blaze, including Eleanor, who spent hours passing water buckets and helping tend to smoke-affected ranch hands. It was near dawn when the fire was finally contained, leaving behind a swath of blackened earth but, thankfully, no loss of life or livestock. Eleanor was helping Mrs. Flores tend to a young ranch hand with minor burns when Owen returned, his face and clothes blackened with soot. Is everyone accounted for? Mrs. Flores asked anxiously. Owen nodded, fatigue evident in every line of his body. All men present and mostly whole, he confirmed, then turned to Eleanor. You should rest, you've been up all night. As have you, she pointed out, noticing the way he winced slightly as he moved. You're hurt. It's nothing, he dismissed. A ember caught me on the shoulder, that's all. Eleanor wouldn't hear of it. Sit, she commanded, pointing to a chair. Let me see, to Mrs. Flores's visible surprise, Owen complied without argument, removing his ruined shirt to reveal an angry red burn on his right shoulder. Eleanor cleaned and dressed the wound with gentle hands, acutely aware of his gaze on her face as she worked. Thank you, he said quietly when she finished, his hand catching hers as she turned to leave. For everything you did tonight, the men are saying you were as steady as any of them. The simple praise warmed her more than it should have. I only did what needed doing, she replied. Owen's thumb traced a small circle on her wrist, the touch sending unexpected heat through her veins. That's what makes you remarkable, Eleanor. You do what needs doing, no matter how difficult. Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition of feelings that had been growing quietly beneath the surface of their practical arrangement. Eleanor drew back slightly, unsettled by the intensity of her reaction to his touch. You should rest, she said, echoing his earlier words. It's been a long night. Owen released her hand reluctantly. It has, he agreed, but there will be others. This is ranching country, Eleanor. Danger is part of the life. I'm beginning to understand that, she replied, thinking of how her heart had lodged in her throat when she'd heard Owen was fighting the fire at its most dangerous point. The weeks following the fire brought subtle changes to their relationship. Owen sought out Eleanor's company more deliberately, inviting her to ride with him to check on the herd or sitting with her on the porch in the evenings. For her part, Eleanor found herself looking forward to these moments, storing away his rare smiles like treasures. 3 months into their marriage, Owen returned from a trip to town with news that the Blackwell brothers had been arrested in Santa Fe for armed robbery. The immediate threat to Eleanor was gone, yet neither of them mentioned the possibility of ending their arrangement. Instead, on a warm evening in October, Owen found Eleanor sitting on the porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. "May I join you?" he asked, gesturing to the space beside her. Eleanor nodded, shifting slightly to make room. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the swing moving gently back and forth. "I received a letter today," Owen said finally. "From the territorial marshal, the Blackwells have been sentenced to 10 years in prison." Eleanor turned to look at him, understanding the significance. "So I'm safe now?" "You are," Owen confirmed, his expression unreadable in the fading light. Eleanor's heart beat faster as she considered what this meant for their arrangement. "Our agreement was to discuss dissolution of the marriage once the threat was gone," she said carefully. Owen nodded, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "It was. Is that what you want?" Eleanor asked, holding her breath for his answer. Owen was quiet for so long that Eleanor began to fear she had misread the situation entirely. Then, slowly, he turned to face her, taking her hands in his. "No," he said simply. "It's not what I want, but what I want isn't what matters, Eleanor. What do you want?" The question hung between them, weighted with months of growing feelings and unspoken desires. Eleanor looked down at their joined hands, at the gold band that had once felt like a disguise but now felt like the most honest thing in her life. "I want to stay," she said, lifting her gaze to meet his. "Not as your cook or as a name on a marriage certificate, but as your wife in truth." The smile that broke across Owen's face was like sunrise after the longest night. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm not an easy man, Eleanor. I have a past that's not always honorable." "I know who you are," Eleanor replied firmly. "I've seen your honor in how you treat your men, in how you've treated me. My father tried to sell me for a debt, and you said my worth could never be counted in coin. That was the moment I began to see the man behind the reputation." Owen released her hands only to cup her face gently between his palms. "I think I began falling in love with you that day," he admitted. "Your courage, your dignity in the face of your father's betrayal, I'd never seen anything like it. Love." Eleanor whispered, hardly daring to believe she'd heard him correctly. "Love," Owen confirmed, his thumbs brushing her cheeks tenderly. "I love you, Eleanor Lynch. Not as a business arrangement or a means of protection, but as the woman who has become the heart of this ranch and the center of my world." Tears blurred Eleanor's vision as joy swelled within her. "I love you too," she said, the words feeling both momentous and utterly natural. "I think I've loved you since the night of the fire when I realized how afraid I was of losing you." Owen's smile deepened, and he leaned forward to press his forehead against hers. "May I kiss you, Mrs. Lynch?" he asked softly, as a husband should kiss his wife. In answer, Eleanor closed the distance between them, her lips meeting his in a kiss that held all the promise of their future together, not a marriage of convenience, but one of choice, of respect, and of a love that had grown quietly but unshakably between two people who had found each other against all odds. As the last light of day faded into dusk, Eleanor and Owen remained on the porch swing, talking of dreams and plans, of children they might have, of the life they would build together. And when Owen carried her across the threshold of the main house later that night, this time to the master bedroom, they would now share. Eleanor knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, their love a currency more valuable than any coin could ever be.